tonight represents justice and the end of a nightmare that has coursed through our family for 37 years. I will leave you with a remark that Karen's mother, Betty Sanders, had inscribed on Karen's headstone that still holds so true to this day. Crime will not decrease until being a criminal becomes more dangerous than being a victim.
He didn't beg. He didn't cry. He simply asked one thing: to die breathing the air he once loved. On June 10, 2025, Gregory Hunt is scheduled to be executed in the state of Alabama. The method is unlike anything most Americans have ever heard of. Nitrogen gas, a silent, invisible killer delivered through a mask. No needles, no electric chair. Just the slow displacement of oxygen until the brain shuts down. But this isn't just about how he will die, it's about why it took so long. In 1988, Gregory Hunt shot and killed his ex-girlfriend Jacqueline in cold blood. The case was open and shut. He confessed. He was sentenced to death. Yet, nearly 4 decades later, he's still breathing, still waiting, still fighting. Now, as the state prepares to use a method never before tried on a human in Alabama, we're left with a chilling set of questions. Why did he choose nitrogen hypoxia? Why did the system take 37 years? And after all this time, does justice still feel like justice at all? Gregory Hunt was not always the man you see in courtroom sketches and prison records. Born and raised in Alabama, he grew up in a working-class black family during the turbulent 1960s. People who knew him back then say he was quiet, almost withdrawn. Not particularly violent, not particularly ambitious, just there. By the time he reached adulthood, Gregory had served in the military. Some say he returned with a temper, others say with trauma. He worked odd jobs, lived in Birmingham, and for a time seemed to be building a normal life. That changed when he met Jacqueline. Jacqueline was younger than Gregory and full of energy. Friends described her as bright, optimistic, a woman who laughed with her whole body. They met sometime in the mid-1980s. The relationship started fast, passionate, intense, then unstable. Within a few months, Jacqueline had confided to friends that she felt trapped. She wanted out. There were arguments, reports of control, jealousy, maybe even abuse. She tried to leave him. That's when the story begins to darken. In May of 1988, Jacqueline was shot to death inside her own apartment. The police didn't have to search far. Gregory Hunt turned himself in within hours. He admitted to the killing. No one else was involved. There was no mystery, no missing pieces, just a single man with a gun and a woman trying to get away. At the time, few people thought the case would linger for long. A conviction seemed inevitable. The death penalty seemed certain, but what no one could predict was that this case would stretch across decades, touching on everything from prison reform to execution methods to the very definition of justice. Birmingham, Alabama, in the late 1980s was a city caught between recovery and relapse. Once the epicenter of civil rights battles, it had slowly moved into an uneasy calm. But beneath the surface, poverty was rising. Crime was spiking, and in certain neighborhoods, trust in the system was fading fast. Gregory Hunt lived in one of those neighborhoods, a working-class black community where jobs were scarce and tempers ran hot. People kept to themselves. Domestic disputes were common, and police presence was inconsistent. When neighbors heard yelling through the thin walls of Jacqueline's apartment, they didn't call the cops. They turned up the volume on their TVs. Gregory had recently lost his job again. He was drinking more. Jacqueline had started seeing someone new. According to court records and friends' accounts, she was trying to move on, but Gregory wasn't ready to let go. In the weeks leading up to the murder, Jacqueline told at least 2 friends that Gregory had shown up at her work uninvited. One night, she said he waited outside her apartment for hours. Another time, he left a handwritten note under her windshield. The words were simple but disturbing. "You're mine. Always." But she never filed a restraining order. never made a formal complaint. Maybe she was afraid. Maybe she believed he wouldn't really hurt her. Or maybe she just wanted to handle it quietly, like so many women in her situation. One neighbor would later tell a reporter that on the night before the murder, Gregory had been seen pacing in front of Jacqueline's building, just walking back and forth in the parking lot, staring up at her window. It was almost midnight. No one said anything. They just watched. It was May the 13th, 1988, a humid Friday night in Birmingham. Jacqueline had just returned home from her shift at the diner where she worked part-time. She was seen by a neighbor around 9 p.m. carrying groceries and smiling faintly. It was the last time anyone saw her alive. At 10:47 p.m., a 911 call came in. The voice on the other end was flat, almost robotic. "This is Gregory Hunt. I just shot someone. I think she's dead. I'm on my way to turn myself in." Police arrived at the scene just 12 minutes later. Jacqueline's apartment door was unlocked. Inside, they found her slumped against the kitchen counter, a single gunshot wound to the chest. The groceries were still on the table, milk leaking from a broken bottle slowly mixing with blood on the floor. There were no signs of forced entry, no signs of struggle. It looked almost peaceful in a grotesque way. One investigator later described it as a frozen moment of chaos turned calm. Gregory Hunt pulled into the police station parking lot minutes later. He stepped out of his car, calmly placed the gun on the hood and raised his hands. Officers said he looked tired, not agitated, not angry, just empty. In the hours that followed, Gregory confessed to everything. He said he had gone there to talk to her one last time, that she didn't want to listen, that he snapped. He told police he had brought the gun in his glove compartment just in case, that he hadn't planned to use it. But something about her voice, about the way she looked at him, made him feel invisible. He fired once, then walked out. No one else was present. No one else was blamed. It was a simple case on paper, but nothing about it felt simple. The death was fast, but the echoes would stretch for decades. The crime scene told a story, but the forensics filled in the silence between the lines. Jacqueline was shot with a .38 caliber revolver. The bullet entered clean through the chest and lodged in her spine. There were no defensive wounds, no bruises, no signs of a struggle. According to the medical examiner, she died within seconds. The apartment was undisturbed. Her purse was on the table. Her shoes were still by the door. The groceries sat half unpacked, one orange rolling across the floor as investigators moved through the scene. It was clear this was not a robbery, not a fight, not a moment that escalated. It was a decision. Police recovered the weapon from the hood of Gregory's car exactly where he said it would be. Ballistics confirmed it was the murder weapon. His fingerprints were all over it. No gloves, no attempt to hide anything. It was almost as if he wanted to be caught. In his taped confession, Gregory never raised his voice. He explained what happened in short, disconnected sentences. "I knocked. She let me in. We talked. She asked me to leave. I shot her." He paused for a long time before saying, "I think I wanted her to know I still had power." There were no eyewitnesses, no need for DNA, no digital evidence. This was 1988. No texts, no security cameras, just blood on the tile and the word of a man who admitted everything. Still, the investigators built the case carefully. They interviewed Jacqueline's friends, co-workers, and neighbors. What emerged was a portrait of a woman trying to escape a toxic relationship and a man spiraling out of control. One friend told detectives Jacqueline had said, "I think he'll hurt me if I try to leave for good." But no one imagined this. At trial, the prosecution would later describe the case as an execution, not a crime of passion. Cold, deliberate, final. The facts were clear, but clarity didn't make it easier to understand. The trial of Gregory Hunt began later that same year in the Jefferson County Courthouse. The evidence was overwhelming. His confession, the murder weapon, the motive. There were no technicalities to exploit, no surprise witnesses, no defense rooted in doubt. Still, the courtroom was tense. Not because of what was in dispute, but because of what it revealed. The prosecution painted Gregory as cold, calculated, and possessive. They emphasized how Jacqueline had tried to break free, how she was moving on, how Gregory had refused to let her go. He didn't just kill her, they argued. He silenced her. The defense did not deny the crime. Instead, they pleaded for mercy. They brought up Gregory's military background, his struggles with mental health, his drinking, his unemployment. They said he was not a monster. He was a broken man in a broken system, but the jury was not swayed. After just 2 hours of deliberation, they found Gregory Hunt guilty of capital murder. Days later, he was sentenced to death by electrocution, the standard method in Alabama at the time. But that was only the beginning. Over the next 3 decades, Gregory's case would pass through the machinery of the American death penalty system. Appeal after appeal was filed and denied. His attorneys argued ineffective counsel, racial bias, constitutional concerns. They questioned the fairness of his trial, the adequacy of his mental health evaluation, the long delays in carrying out his sentence. None of it changed the outcome. By the early 2000s, Alabama had switched from electrocution to lethal injection. Gregory Hunt remained on death row through the transition. He watched others come and go, some executed, some exonerated, some dying of natural causes before their sentence was carried out. In 2018, Alabama passed a law allowing death row inmates to choose nitrogen hypoxia as their method of execution. It was described as a humane alternative, but critics called it experimental, untested, possibly cruel. Gregory Hunt chose it. He became one of the first in the state to formally request nitrogen as the method of his execution. No one knew exactly why. Some speculated it was fear of needles. Others believed it was about control. Either way, clock had started again, and for the first time in decades, the system began to move. June 9, 2025. The day before the scheduled execution, inside Holman Correctional Facility. Gregory Hunt was awake before sunrise. Inmate records show he refused breakfast, but requested extra time alone in his cell. He did not meet with clergy. He did not write any final letters, but he did make one phone call. To his younger sister, the conversation lasted 9 minutes. According to her statement afterward, he didn't cry. He simply said, "Thank you for remembering me." By noon, he had met with his legal team. They reviewed the process again. What to expect, when it would happen, what to do if something went wrong. Gregory nodded, but said little. At one point, he reportedly asked, "Can I hear music on the way in?" The answer was no. His final meal was modest: fried chicken, cornbread, a slice of pecan pie. He ate half of it and left the rest untouched. At 7 p.m., prison officials began the official 24-hour watch. A correctional officer was stationed outside his cell at all times. No electronics, no visitors, just silence. According to prison staff, Gregory spent most of the night sitting upright on his bed, eyes open, staring at the wall. He did not pray. He did not speak. At 3 a.m., he finally laid down. When asked if he had any final requests, he said only one: "Please don't let my sister watch." He wrote no wider statement. He declined to speak to the media. He chose to face death without spectacle, without message, without noise. June 10, 2025. 6:00 p.m. The execution chamber at Holman Correctional Facility was prepared for something the state of Alabama had never done before. Gregory Hunt was about to become the first man in the state to be executed using nitrogen hypoxia. The room was cold and still. A padded chair stood in the center equipped with restraints and a clear plastic mask connected to a canister of nitrogen gas. There were no visible tubes, no needles, no gurney. At 6, 12:27 p.m. Gregory Hunt was escorted in. He walked without assistance. His hands were cuffed but steady. Witnesses described him as calm, detached, as if already halfway gone. He declined to make a final statement. He looked straight ahead and said nothing as the mask was secured over his nose and mouth. His chest rose once, then again, then again. At 6:34 p.m., the nitrogen began to flow. There was no convulsing, no choking, no struggle, just a slow exhale. One witness said it looked like he had fallen asleep with his eyes half open. Another said the silence in the room was louder than any scream. At 6:51 p.m., Gregory Hunt was pronounced dead. The room remained still for several minutes after. The prison warden gave a nod. The witnesses were dismissed. The mask was removed. The body was taken out. Outside the prison gates, a small group of protesters held signs against capital punishment. A few reporters stood in silence. There were no cheers, no tears, just the low sound of cars passing on Highway 21. Inside the prison, another cell sat empty. Gregory Hunt died 37 years after he pulled the trigger. By the time the state executed him, his victim, Jacqueline, had been gone longer than she had lived. Her family had aged, her friends had moved on, and the world had changed beyond recognition. And yet in that small, sterile room, the system came full circle. But was it justice? Some say yes. A man who took a life finally lost his own. Others ask, what purpose is served by waiting nearly 4 decades to carry out a sentence? Is that justice delayed or justice denied? Then there's the method itself. Nitrogen hypoxia was supposed to be more humane, cleaner, quieter. But is a silent death any less violent than one we can hear? And what about remorse? Gregory Hunt never publicly apologized, never explained, never justified. Was that an act of dignity or defiance? We don't have those answers. All we have is a timeline. A woman who wanted to be free. A man who couldn't let go. A system that moved slowly, painfully toward a decision it made long ago. And now a question for us. When the killing stops, does the story end? Or does it echo somewhere deeper than any courtroom or prison wall,